I've tried to highlight what I think are the kinds of things folks are looking for in Grand Challenge programs. Is there a key neglected problem that needs some attention? Is there originality in the proposal? Is it a competitive application? Is it well put together? Is it a good fit with this particular sponsor's plan? Because there are lots of different opportunities these days to put projects in different environments. And I'd like to highlight that this was a good fit for us. And I want to touch on something because I'm very sensitive about the fact that there are lots of different folks applying from very different backgrounds, different ages, different countries, different levels of expertise. Are there any kind of unfair advantages to people who are more established, to people who are in Seattle? And I'd like to promise you that I don't think so. And I'll try to point out that, if anything, there are probably higher burdens for certain things. And that was in my mind as I was writing the proposal. You know, why go to the Grand Challenge program for this particular proposal? In terms of the application itself, these are the things that you've heard before. It has to have clear goals. It has to have logical plan and priorities. You have to have some idea of what the possible outcomes were. Somebody raised the importance of looking at things that you wanted to see, as well as things that may crop up that does not agree with your hypothesis. Facing that up front and saying, these are the things that we will be looking for that might tell us that our system is not working correctly, are all things that are discussed in the proposal. And of course, future directions. Now, I say here that this was a starting framework for phase one. Even though most of you are preparing phase twos, I wanted to just bring this up because this sets the platform for what happens in phase two. We were already thinking ahead in terms of what we would want to do if we had more resources. So somebody in the audience said, you know, what are the key measures of whether you have succeeded in demonstrating feasibility? And so that was all built into phase one. They're pretty simple, humble goals. But if those goals could not be met within a period of a year or so, then maybe we were being too ambitious about what we had wanted to do for phase two. So we had to demonstrate that those things could be done. And there were some questions on whether that would happen or not. So when we wrote the phase two proposal, again, the people who wrote the instructions ask you to write in your own words what you had wanted to do in phase one, what did you accomplish, what are some of the things that turned out exactly the way you had expected, and what were some surprises? Of the things that were surprises, does it make you change your direction a little bit? And we had elements of all of these things when we got to the point where we had to write a phase two. So the first question I've listed up there is, was feasibility established? Were we able to do some of the things we wanted to do? This business of creating confidence in your reviewers is really important. Many of the points that were raised by the panelists are things I think we covered fairly well. You want to establish your own credibility. You want to show awareness of what others in the field are doing. So we try to reference their work. With our own project, we tighten up the goals based on what we learned in phase one. We give more detailed plans and priorities. And we continue to emphasize the implications of our work. Part of the reason for raising the chemical component as a higher priority was that understanding things is a nice thing to do, but if you ever listen to Bill and Melinda Gates talk, it's about urgency. Millions of people are dying out there. Drugs against malaria are not coming up fast enough. We're in a perilous situation where only a few good compounds are out there. If we can find ways to protect compounds that are good, that's more important than waiting for the biology to catch up and then deliver drugs. So we kept emphasizing that in our proposal. When it came to budgets, every part of the proposal has to have creativity, including how you put your budget together. The budget is an opportunity, again, for you to convey what you think is important. It is the Gates Foundation proposal guidelines have a very specific way in which they list objectives and in which they list different key things that you're going to do. We actually rewrote the proposal itself to match the way that the budget spreadsheet was set up, so that anybody who's reviewing the grant could quickly go back and forth between what we were proposing to do, how we were going to do it, how much resources we were asking for, and see what the different things we're paying for if they go back and look at the science. So the very tight connection between what we were trying to do science-wise and what we were asking for in terms of resources. There is a little bit of planning for uncertainties, because if we knew everything that we were going to do and how things were going to turn out, that would be a boring proposal. This is about grand challenges. There are unexpected things that were thought to occur.
Great. So just to highlight, so the two main big points from Pradip on this is, the first was that when you have your idea of your plan, actually being your hardest critic to say, this is the potential gap, or if this doesn't work, this is my alternative plan. You end up kind of setting yourself up to show, I understand where I'm going, and I realize I don't have the answers to all these parts, but this is what I would do in case it didn't work out. So kind of walk us through that. You've thought through a plan A, a plan B for taking your research forward.
How much time do you devote on writing a grant? I mean, as for young PIs like myself, how much time do you think, at an average, would be required to put in to write a grant in?
I think it varies. I really am trying to be as honest as I can when I talk to you guys. I think in our business there is a lot of pleasantries. Everybody talks about the ideal world, how things should be. I am terrible about grant writing. I'll be the first to admit. I put things off to the very last minute. I found typos in this as I was reading today, and I was so embarrassed. There is a manual that's been written as a manual, and anyway. I think the most important thing is I really think about projects a lot, more than the writing part. I think you have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it, especially for these kinds of activities where, in phase one, I don't know what the numbers are these days, but 400 some people apply, or 4,000 apply, and 100 get funded, something like that. You can't take this lightly. You have to be your own self-critic. You have to think about it. You might even play with different versions of this with your own staff or your colleagues, and they are your critics, and they're telling you, watch out for that. Why are you doing this? Why don't you go do it differently? So the thoughts that go into the proposal is not during the writing part. The writing is almost the last thing that I do. But sometimes I underestimate how hard writing is, and I really should devote more time to it. I'm not answering your question directly, but basically I have to run my lab. I have to talk to people in my lab. When I'm on airplanes, I'm sketching ideas about how to put things together. So by the time I go to write, I'm actually fairly certain. I've written grants of this size in a period of about 2 weeks or something like that, because I have references in front of me in a file. I have thoughts I've sketched out in my mind. And then, as somebody pointed out, it's good to set it aside, go back, revisit it, make sure it says what you're trying to say.
So I guess I just make one or two quick comments. First, thanks. I mean, this has been a brilliant walkthrough, but it's really reinforced a few things for me. And one is taking those few sentences just to kind of reiterate, what might be presumed to be obvious, but doing it in a way that is, really cogent, is incredibly valuable, because one of the things as a reviewer is when you kind of get to those last few proposals and you're thinking about which ones you're selecting, you're starting to switch in your own mind thinking about, okay, how am I going to defend this selection? And so having, a really kind of compelling description of how this relates to a strategy, or this is, ties into reasonable things that we know, in your own words, is actually incredibly valuable, and it really helps the flow. And then I'd also, really reiterate sort of the structure, because you tend to read the proposal kind of in phases. You get a bunch of them, you scan all of them, you form some pre-opinion, and then you go in and you dive into them in detail, and it's that sort of scan that's very useful as a first framing of how you think about the proposal as you go. But I think this was wonderful. It's a really great discussion.
Thank you.